If you're having trouble setting boundaries or standing up for yourself, it's likely because a part of you learned at a really young age that people pleasing was necessary for you to feel safe and connected in your environment. I'm a psychiatrist, and I have spent years struggling to set boundaries and speak up for myself because I have a strong inner people pleaser. I've been working on healing this dynamic inside of myself for the last couple of years. In this video, I'm excited to share how people pleasing stems from childhood trauma as well as our collective cultural trauma, including an IFS approach to healing your inner people pleaser using compassionate curiosity. And at the end of the video, I'll share a short guided meditation to help you begin to connect with your inner people pleaser. So I used to work in hospital-based psychiatry, which can be pretty stressful work. Now, I think that I was drawn to a helping profession because I'm a highly sensitive, highly empathic person. And when I feel that people are in pain, I really want to help them. But when you're working in the healthcare system and the need in the community outweighs the supply of people to help, it's really easy for your inner people pleaser to lead you to overgive. So I knew that I needed to set boundaries when I was working in these positions, but I really struggled to do that because I would just think about all of the people that needed help. I really didn't feel like I had any other choice. And whenever I would feel that someone else was in pain, I felt like I just had to help them. Now, this led me to experience cycles of burnout. And when you start to burn out, you can really get frustrated. And sometimes an angry part of you can come up to start to try to set boundaries for you. So, this is what I call angry boundaries, which is often the starting point for people with a strong inner people pleaser. But ideally, we really don't want to be setting angry boundaries. My growing edge is to set kind, healthy boundaries with other people that comes from a grounded place where you can feel like you're in integrity with your values and you're taking care of yourself while supporting others and making sure that you're not giving from an empty cup, which was really my pattern in the past. So I've noticed that this people pleasing dynamic is really common amongst people in helping professions in health and mental health care. And people pleasing is also a really common protective response in the people that I work with and that I support now that I'm in the community, working primarily as a trauma informed internal family systems therapist. So IFS therapy has really helped me to understand how this people pleasing dynamic works. So IFS provides both a therapeutic process for healing trauma and also a map for understanding the human psyche. So this map is based on a concept called multiplicity, which just means that your psyche is made up of different parts. Now, parts are a totally natural aspect of being a human being. Parts are normal, everyone has them. But what happens is the more trauma that you experience in your life, the more fragmented your psyche can become. And the more conflict arises in your inner family, which really leads you far away from those feelings of inner peace and harmony that we all desire. So there are two main types of parts in the IFS model. The first type of parts are called exiles. So exiles are your most vulnerable and wounded inner children that carry the emotional wounds from your past. So these emotional wounds are things like shame, fear, anxiety, loneliness, sadness, powerlessness, invalidation. And they also go along with limiting beliefs, things like I'm unworthy, the world is an unsafe place, I can't trust anyone. So these painful emotional burdens are held by your exiles. And we call them exiles because the pain is so overwhelming, they end up being repressed into your subconscious or essentially sent into exile. Now that you have all of this really intense emotional pain that's been suppressed, there are other parts of you that feel the need to take on roles to protect this pain, to prevent it from being triggered. And one of the ways that they do that is by trying to manage your life, by managing the people around you, by managing your emotions. They can hopefully prevent you from being overwhelmed by them. So the downside of this strategy is that these parts can get really overwhelmed and they can end up being really controlling or rigid in their strategies. So we call these parts protectors because they feel responsible for protecting your exiles and preventing you from being overwhelmed by your pain. So this is where people pleasing comes in. People pleasing is a protective strategy that often begins really early in your life. It might even start before you're 5 years old. especially if you're really sensitive and empathic. The concept of the highly sensitive person has been researched extensively by a person named Elaine Aron, and approximately 15 to 20% of the population are known to be highly sensitive. This trait is especially common for ADHDers and autistic people. Sensitive means that you're more aware of and responsive to your environment. So I hear from a lot of people that they say that they had a happy childhood, they're not aware of any childhood trauma, but trauma really shows up in the wound and the impact that it leaves in you and the emotional burden carried by your exiles. So if you're highly sensitive and you're really aware of what's happening in your environment, there doesn't necessarily have to be really catastrophic adverse childhood events for trauma to be internalized. So think about a highly sensitive person who's exposed to a lot of conflict within the home. Maybe there's a lot of yelling. So when you're tuning into that sense of anger in the people around you, that can lead you to feel really unsafe. So your nervous system is registering signs that your environment isn't safe. And that leads this people pleasing part of you to work really hard to try to manage your environment because your exiles are feeling scared. So, this people pleasing part of you has learned this strategy to attend to the people around you, to put their needs ahead of your own, to work really hard to make sure that they're happy and calm so that you can feel safe. Because when you're a small child, having the people around you happy and calm feels necessary for your survival. But the thing is that this strategy doesn't just stop as you get older. Once you enter your school years, this people pleasing part of you might be using this strategy to try to get along with your peers, to try to make sure that you're accepted by them, by your teachers. And then when you become an adult, this can show up in your work life, which can make it hard to set boundaries. It can lead to burnout. And it can, of course, show up in your personal relationships too, where you may have needs or desires that you want to share with someone, but you don't feel like you can speak up for yourself. So the inner people pleaser is very afraid of upsetting people, of making people angry, or of getting in trouble. So excessive apologizing is something that we often see with the inner people pleaser. And they're essentially going to do anything that they can to try to keep the peace. And that often comes at the expense of standing up for yourself, of saying no when you really want to say no, of setting boundaries, or of even being able to find the words that you want to really speak your truth, to stand up for yourself, and to be as open and honest as you'd like to be in your relationships. So, how do you go about healing this inner people pleaser? So, it's likely that you've learned to relate to this part of you with judgment and criticism. The inner critic is another common protective part in the IFS model. So, when you notice that you're struggling to be more authentic, to set boundaries, it's really common that another part comes online to judge you and say things like, oh, I should be better at this. I need to set better boundaries. So, for me, I was reading about how to set boundaries or watching things online. But the thing is, you really can't bypass the pain that you're in and the fact that it feels incredibly unsafe to be standing up for yourself, to be setting boundaries if it threatens the sense of peace with potential conflict. So you really can't use force and willpower to overwhelm your nervous system telling you that what you're trying to do isn't safe. So the way that we approach this in IFS therapy is that we meet your inner people pleaser with openness and curiosity and compassion. So if you notice this part of you being triggered, say you're in a situation where you need to set a boundary or say something that you think a person might not want to hear, you might need to take a pause. Now, you could do this in the moment, or you could ask to be excused from the conversation and come back. And just start to notice that people pleasing part of you showing up with guilt around the possibility of not doing what someone else wants of you, or of anxiety or fear of upsetting them. So it can be helpful to place a hand over the part in your body where you're noticing those feelings and just send a little message inward to this people pleaser, remembering that this is essentially a parentified inner child who is absolutely terrified of people being upset with you and feels responsible for managing your life. So you could send a little message inward just saying, I'm really feeling you being activated right now. I'm here for you. You're not in this on your own. You're not alone. I'm an adult now, and I'm here to support you. So if you haven't done IFS before or interacted with your inner child, it can feel a little funny when you start to do it for the first time. But I think what you'll notice is that that anxiety and that guilt can kind of lessen, and you're really just learning to relate to yourself in a different way, with compassion and curiosity instead of judgment and criticism, which is really a way that we learn to relate to ourselves in this culture. In addition to things like minimizing our own pain, right? The things that happened to me really weren't that bad. I shouldn't be feeling this way. But the emotional pain that you're in is the impact of that event, or even more often, is a series of events that led to these burdens being taken on. So I've spoken about how this inner people-pleasing dynamic may be more sensitive for highly sensitive or neurodivergent people because you're more aware of your environment and more likely to internalize trauma, more likely to pick up on cues that there's a lack of safety in your environment from things like conflict or tension in the people around you. I think it's also worth mentioning that while people pleasing isn't gender specific by any means, people of any gender identity can have an inner people pleaser, that women in our culture tend to be conditioned to be more compliant, to be self sacrificing, and to put other people's needs ahead of their own. So, Western society has been dominated by several thousand years of patriarchy, where women have experienced oppression and where there's really been external authority that's been in power that has forced people in marginalized communities to disconnect from their power, to disconnect from their authentic truth, and to really set their needs aside in order to submit and comply with authority. So, this inner people pleasing dynamic is really connected to patriarchal oppression. And I think it's really important to realize that these personal burdens that we take on, your personal trauma, really is held within this broader context of a culture dominated by patriarchy. So your personal identity and intersectionality really impacts the type of trauma that you take on. And that's an important thing to be aware of, because people pleasing isn't just from the events that happen in your own life. It's really a strategy that a protective part of you has taken on to help you survive in a patriarchal society. So just to give you a brief example from my own life, I've been writing a book for the last several years. The intention is to help people to heal on a deeper level, and also to encourage a broadening and an evolution of our mental health paradigm away from a narrow biological focus to be more inclusive and holistic, to be trauma-informed, neurodivergent affirming, and decolonizing, recognizing the impact of these cultural burdens like patriarchy on the mental health of people in the population. Now, I'm really excited to share this book with the world, but my inner people pleaser is absolutely terrified, because standing up against the status quo feels very scary for this part of me who is absolutely terrified of being judged, rejected, persecuted. So it has really taken a lot of time and intention for me to be with that part and to be with my tender exiles who really just want to be accepted and feel safe and connected in the world. So when you can start to recognize how these really painful feelings connect to your childhood, and how these protective responses like people pleasing have developed to help keep you safe in your world, it starts to be a lot easier to appreciate these hardworking parts of you and to have compassion for them, and to recognize that these strategies feel absolutely essential for your survival. So I'm going to walk you through a really brief guided meditation in case you're feeling curious to get to know your inner people pleaser a little bit more. And that's really the kind of attitude that we want to go inside with to shift your attention inward, is with this sense of openness and curiosity to get to know whatever arises inside of you. So if you are going to shift your attention inward, just make sure that you're in a safe place to do so. You may find it supportive to close your eyes and see if you can invite your inner people pleaser to be present with you for a few minutes. Notice where you feel that part in or around your body. Notice what sensations are present and if there's an emotion present. And getting a sense of what kind of things this part says to you in your mind when it's present. There might be some worries, some other thoughts. And just see if you can notice with a sense of openness and curiosity. You can also ask, how have you been trying to help me? Just sort of allow it to bubble up from your subconscious. How long have you been doing this job for? And finally, what are you afraid might happen if you stopped doing this job? You can take a moment to offer this part an update as well. Just really acknowledging how big these fears are. And letting your people pleaser know that it's not alone anymore. That it has you, the adult self. You might also let it know your age and the year. To just really orient this part to present day reality. And finally, you can ask it how it would like to be supported, how it could feel more safe and connected to you, so that it might be willing to allow you to begin setting boundaries. Great. If it feels right, you might make a commitment to check in with this part again. This doesn't have to be its only opportunity to connect with you, to develop a relationship with your parts. It's a lot like developing a relationship with another person. It takes time and consistency. You could also offer this part your thanks and appreciation for showing up and connecting with you today. Let it know you'll be back another time to connect again. And when that feels complete, you can slowly bring yourself back to the room around you. Welcome back. So that's a short guided meditation to connect with your inner people pleaser. It's something that you can do regularly to develop that relationship. And it's important to recognize too that healing your exiles is an important aspect of IFS work. And that is one way that your protectors begin to soften when there isn't so much pain for them to protect. And that really does require the support of a trained IFS therapist. I'm happy to share some links in the notes below so that you can find an IFS therapist in your local area or online if that would feel supportive. Please feel free to return to this meditation in the future to connect with your inner people pleaser again. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments how that meditation went for you, how this information landed for you, and what sort of situations trigger your inner people pleaser. Thanks for listening.